Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Please note that the link has crime scene photos and they are graphic. Please click link at your own discretion. You may remember the song from childhood, Skipping Rope, while your classmates sang the morbid song about Lizzie Borden and her parents' grisly murder. That was most of our first introduction to the case of Fall River's infamous murder in 1892. However, the song isn't quite accurate. This is part 1 of the Lizzie Borden case, the murder. Lizzie Andrew Borden was born in Fall River, Massachusetts on July 19, 1860, to parents Sarah Anthony Morse Borden and Andrew Jackson Borden. Sarah and Andrew had 3 children total: Emma, who was 9 years older than Lizzie; Alice, who would not live to see her second birthday, having died of dropsy of the brain; and then Lizzie, who came along a couple years later. When Lizzie was 2 years old, tragedy would strike the family again, when Sarah would pass away from uterine congestion and spinal disease at the age of 39. Emma took Lizzie under her wing after their mother's death, caring for her and acting as woman of the house, in the absence of Sarah. Andrew, who felt he needed a mother to care for his young girls, remarried 3 years later to a woman named Abby Durfee Gray, who stepped in and took on the stepmother role to the 2 girls. The sisters did not ever warm up to Abby, especially Emma, who had felt that she had been handling things just fine without a stepmother and would often call Abby Mrs. Borden, rather than mother, which was more expected at the time. This tension would only grow throughout the years the family lived together. Andrew Borden came from a lineage of wealth in Fall River, but had struggled financially in his young adult years before he made a name for himself in the manufacturing business. Andrew began to be successful in selling furniture and caskets, before he set his sights on property development, where he really prospered. In his final years, Andrew owned several textile mills, commercial properties, and was the president of the Union Savings Bank and director of the Durfee Safe Deposit and Trust Co. At the time of Andrew's death, he was worth $300,000, which is about $10 million in today's money. Despite accumulating so much wealth, Andrew was notoriously frugal. His home did not have any plumbing installed, despite being common for those of affluence at the time, and where most of the wealthy Fall River residents lived in the Hill neighborhood. The Borden family lived in a 2-story home in a more industrial area. This became a huge point of contention between the 4 members of the Borden house. Despite being unmarried at the age of 32, something that was considered unusual in the late 1800s, Lizzie kept herself busy with her many passions. Lizzie spent her weekends teaching Sunday school, served as secretary-treasurer for the Christian Endeavor Society, and focused her time in women's-focused organizations such as the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Ladies' Fruit and Flower Mission. Lizzie was a well-loved and active member of the community in Fall River. Inside the Borden home, however, tensions were mounting steadily in 1892. Emma and Lizzie would rarely acknowledge their stepmother, Abby, who they believed had only married their father for his money. This feeling was amplified when Andrew had paid to purchase a home for Abby's sister, which was something that had greatly offended both Lizzie and Emma. The 2 women approached their father and demanded that he purchase one of Andrew's rental properties for $1, which he reluctantly agreed to. It wasn't long before the 2 sisters sold that same home back to their father for $5,000, and moved back into the Borden home. Around this time, Lizzie was speaking to the local dressmaker of the troubles at home, having called Abby a mean old thing. In May of 1892, Lizzie had been caring for a flock of pigeons in the family barn, which she loved and adored, and had recently built a roost for. One evening Lizzie had returned home and checked in on her pigeons, when she discovered that they had been hacked to death and were lying lifeless at the bottom of her homemade roost. Andrew's defense for killing the pigeons was that he believed that the birds were attracting young children who were trying to hunt them. In July of 1892, both Emma and Lizzie would take extended trips out of town. In August, shortly before the deaths of Abby and Andrew, Lizzie spent 4 nights in a boarding house instead of the family home. When Lizzie returned home, the entire family, along with the maid Bridget, whom the family called Maggie, there are 2 explanations for this. Either their former name was named Maggie and they couldn't be bothered to learn a new name, or it was also common to call an Irish maid Maggie, in these times, fell ill with what they believed was food poisoning. Lizzie later explained that due to her father's frugal ways, a mutton stew has been on the stove for several days at the time of the murders, and the family had been eating from it to save money. Abby would visit the local doctor, Dr. Bowen, on August 2, complaining of severe stomach pains, and speculated that she might have been poisoned. Dr. Bowen was skeptical of this claim, and reassured her that she most likely was dealing with a bout of food poisoning. However, on August 3rd, Lizzie goes to the local pharmacist asking him for prussic acid, claiming she wants to use it to clean her sealskin cape. Prussic acid is now more commonly called hydrogen cyanate, a deadly poison. Suspicious of her claims, the pharmacist denies her this purchase. On the evening of August 3, 1892, the Borden home received an unexpected visitor. At their doorstep was John Morse, the brother of Andrew's first wife, Sarah. While John did not arrive with any luggage or toiletries, he had agreed to spend the evening in the family's guest room, and spend the next day around Fall River visiting another family member. That evening, John stated that he had not seen Lizzie at all, and this was because Lizzie was visiting at her friend Alice Russell's home. While Lizzie was at Alice's house, she spoke about how she feared her family was being poisoned, because her father had enemies, and that she has seen suspicious people lurking around the Borden home. She told Alice, "I am afraid that someone will do something." The next morning at 7 a.m., Andrew, Abby, John, and Bridget gathered around the dining room table to have breakfast. The four ate more old mutton stew, mutton broth, Johnny cakes, bananas, and sugar cookies. Lizzie briefly popped in, but due to her current refusal to dine with her stepmother, she just grabbed some molasses cookies and took them with her, and Emma was out of town visiting friends. Afterwards, John and Andrew went to the sitting room, and Abby began her morning chores, instructing Bridget to clean the windows of the entire house, a job that must have been taxing for Bridget, as she was still dealing with vomiting from her bout of food poisoning. While outside cleaning the windows, Bridget spoke over the fence with the neighbor's maid whom she was friendly with, and was also seen vomiting into the grass. 20 minutes before 9, John Morse left the home out the rear door near the kitchen. He told in later testimony that once he left the home, Andrew hooked the lock behind him. He also stated in later testimony what his day looked like. He went to the post office, walked a mile and a quarter to Weybosset Street, to visit with his niece and nephew, where he spent the morning. His nephew wasn't home, but he visited with his niece until about 11:20. Back at the Borden home, at 9 a.m., Andrew left for his morning walk and errands. Sometime between 9 and 9:30, Abby went upstairs to tidy up the guest room where John had been staying, and to make up the bed for her guest's second night. While in the guest room, someone had walked in and approached her. According to the autopsy, Abby was facing this person when she was struck with a hatchet on the side of her head, cutting her just above her ear. The force of this blow caused Abby to turn and fall face down on the floor, which caused contusions on her face and nose. Once she was down, the assailant struck Abby in the back of the head a total of 17 times, killing her. She laid on the guest room floor, undetected, for several hours, despite the door being open and her body being visible from the staircase directly in front of the door. According to the autopsy, Abby's wounds were as follows. Was a glancing scalp wound 2 inches in length by 1.5 inch in width, situated 3 inches above left ear hole, cut from above downwards and did not penetrate the skull. 2. Was exactly on top of the skull 1 inch long, penetrating into but not through the skull. 3. Was parallel to number 2, 1.5 inch long, and penetrating through the skull. 4. Was 2 1/4 inch long above occipital protuberance and 1.5 inch long. 5. Was parallel to number 4 and 1.5 inch long. 6. Was just above and parallel to number 5, and 1 1/4 inch long. On top of skull was a transverse fracture 2 inches in length, a continuation of a penetrating wound. 7. Was 2 inches long and 2 inches behind ear hole, crushing and carrying bone into brain. All the wounds of the head following number 7, though incised, crushed through into the brain. 8. Was 2.5 inch long. 9. Was 2 3/4 inch long. 10. Was 1 3/4 inch long. 11. Was 1/2 inch long. 12. Was 2 1/4 inch long. 13. Was 1 3/4 inch long. 14. Was 2.5 inch long. 15. Reached from middle line of head towards the ear 5 inches long. 16. Was 1 inch long. 17. Was 1/2 inch long. 18. Was 3.5 inch long. These wounds on the right side were parallel, the direction being mostly from in front backwards. Around 10:30 a.m., Andrew approached his front door only to find it locked, so he knocked on the door to be let in. Bridget answered the door, and when she did, it jammed. She later claims that she heard someone giggle from the top of the stairs. Whoever it was directly in view of Abby's lifeless body on the guest room floor. Bridget later testified that the laugh sounded like Lizzie, but she couldn't be sure. Andrew makes his way to the sitting room carrying a small parcel, and Lizzie enters letting him know that Abby wasn't home. She has received a note from a sick friend, and Abby went to this friend at once to help her out. This was deemed as strange, as Abby didn't have many friends in Fall River, if any at all. Bridget claims that she came into the sitting room and helped Andrew into his slippers, taking off his boots. This was later challenged in court, because Andrew was indeed found in his boots, and not slippers. Andrew tells the two women that he is going to lie down on the sofa and take a midday nap, and feeling unwell, Bridget retired to her room in the attic for a rest as well. According to Lizzie, she claims that she went out to the barn to look for sinkers for an upcoming fishing trip, and took with her 3 pears from the pear tree outside the home. Around 10:30 a.m., Andrew approached his front door only to find it locked, so he knocked on the door to be let in. Bridget answered the door, and when she did, it jammed. She later claims that she heard someone giggle from the top of the stairs. Whoever it was directly in view of Abby's lifeless body on the guest room floor. Bridget later testified that the laugh sounded like Lizzie, but she couldn't be sure. Andrew makes his way to the sitting room carrying a small parcel, and Lizzie enters letting him know that Abby wasn't home. She has received a note from a sick friend, and Abby went to this friend at once to help her out. This was deemed as strange, as Abby didn't have many friends in Fall River, if any at all. Bridget claims that she came into the sitting room and helped Andrew into his slippers, taking off his boots. This was later challenged in court, because Andrew was indeed found in his boots, and not slippers. Andrew tells the two women that he is going to lie down on the sofa and take a midday nap, and feeling unwell, Bridget retired to her room in the attic for a rest as well. According to Lizzie, she claims that she went out to the barn to look for sinkers for an upcoming fishing trip, and took with her 3 pears from the pear tree outside the home. At around 11 a.m., Andrew was attacked with a hatchet, like his wife. While he lay sleeping on the sofa, an assailant snuck into the room and gave Andrew 11 blows to the head and face. One of these blows cleanly cut through Andrew's left eye, splitting it in two. According to the autopsy, his wounds were as followed. The wounds beginning at the nose and to the left were as follows. 1. Incised wound 4 inches long beginning at lower border of left nasal bone and reaching to lower edge of lower jaw, cutting through nose, upper lip, lower lip, and slightly into bone of upper and lower jaw. 2. Began at internal angle of eye and extended to 1 3/8 of an inch of lower edge of jaw, beginning 4 1/2 an inch in length, cutting through the tissues and into the bone. 3. Began at lower border of lower eyelid cutting through the tissues and into the cheekbone, 2 inches long and 1 3/8 of an inch deep. 4. Began 2 inches above upper eyelid 1/2 inch external to wound number 3, thence downward and outward through middle of left eyebrow through the eyeball cutting it completely in halves, and excising a piece of the skull 1 1/2 an inch in length by 1/2 inch in width. Length of wood 4 1/2 an inch. 5. Began on level of same wound superficial scalp wound downward and outward 2 inches long. 6. Parallel with this 1/4 inch long, downward and outward. 7. Began 1/2 inch below number 5, 3 inches in length downward and outward, penetrating cavity of skull. On top of skull was a transverse fracture 4 1/2 an inch in length. 8. Began directly above number 7 and 1 inch in length downward and outward. 9. Directly posterior to number 8 beginning at ear and extending 4 inches long, 2 inches in width, crushing bone and carrying bone into brain. Also crushing from without in. 10. Directly behind this and above it, and running downwards backward 2 inches long superficially. The general direction of all these wounds is parallel to each other. Shortly after the murder, Lizzie walks into the sitting room and began to scream for Bridget, claiming someone had snuck into the home and killed her father. One of the women ran to Dr. Bowen's home, summoning him to come help. When he arrived, he noticed that Andrew's wounds were still bleeding, indicating a very recent attack. Abby's body was discovered upstairs, and she had already turned cold, indicating a time of death much earlier than Andrew's. Police swarm the home, and the two bodies are moved into the dining room table, where an autopsy is later performed in the same place the family had gathered for breakfast only hours before. Their time of death was listed at 11 a.m. Come back tomorrow for part 2, the investigation.